Have you ever wondered how coffee became the world's most popular drink? Well, our journey begins in the highlands of Ethiopia, over 1,000 years ago. This story is not just about a beverage, it's about how one little bean sparked a global phenomenon. Legend has it that a young goat herder named Kaldi was the first to discover the power of coffee. One day, while watching his goats roam the hillsides, Kaldi noticed something strange. His goats were unusually energetic, jumping around, dancing, and refusing to sleep at night. Curious, he observed them more closely and noticed they had been eating bright red berries from a certain bush. Intrigued by this, Kaldi decided to try the berries himself. Almost instantly, he felt a rush of energy, a boost of focus, and a sense of alertness. This was no ordinary plant, this was something special. Kaldi shared his discovery with a local monk, who, at first, was skeptical. But when the monk tried the berries, he too felt awake and energized. He realized the berries could help him stay alert during long hours of prayer and meditation. So, he began drying the berries and boiling them into a drink, a primitive version of what we now know as coffee. From there, the knowledge of these magical berries began to spread. Word traveled from one village to another, and soon, coffee became an important part of Ethiopian culture. It wasn't just a drink, it became part of rituals, ceremonies, and social gatherings. What's truly fascinating is how coffee was initially consumed. Unlike today's brewed drinks, the early Ethiopians didn't always make liquid coffee. Sometimes, they would crush the berries and mix them with animal fat, creating an early form of an energy bar. This shows how versatile and treasured the coffee bean was even back then. Ethiopia is still considered the birthplace of coffee. The name coffee is even believed to have come from the Kaffa region of Ethiopia, where the plant naturally grew. Even today, Ethiopia holds deep traditions surrounding coffee, including the famous Ethiopian coffee ceremony, which can take hours and involves roasting beans, grinding them, and preparing them in a special pot called a jabina. Coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a spiritual and cultural experience. Families and neighbors would gather, tell stories, and share wisdom over several rounds of freshly brewed coffee. It was, and still is, a symbol of hospitality and respect. Before coffee ever reached cafes in Paris, or busy streets in New York, or modern-day coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, it was part of a peaceful and sacred tradition in Ethiopian villages. And that humble beginning is what makes the story of coffee so rich. So next time you sip your favorite cup of coffee, remember, you're not just enjoying a drink. You're tasting centuries of history, culture, and human curiosity that began with a curious goat herder and a hillside full of energetic goats in Ethiopia. After its legendary discovery in Ethiopia, coffee didn't just stay tucked away in the highlands. No, this mysterious, energizing drink began a journey, one that would change entire civilizations. By the 15th century, coffee had crossed the Red Sea and taken root in Yemen, in the Arabian Peninsula. Here, it found fertile soil, literally and culturally. The Yemenis began cultivating coffee trees in the mountainous region of Mocha, yes, that Mocha, the name that lives on in your favorite cafe menu today. But how did coffee go from a curious little berry in Ethiopia to a spiritual staple across the Islamic world? It all began with Sufi mystics. These deeply spiritual men would gather late into the night, chanting, praying, meditating, and guess what helped them stay awake and focused? Coffee. They called it kawa, which originally meant wine in Arabic, but eventually became associated with this non-alcoholic yet invigorating drink. Coffee was seen not just as a stimulant, but as a divine gift, a way to stay alert during nightly devotions. Sufi orders spread this practice throughout Yemen and beyond, and soon, coffeehouses began popping up in major cities of the Islamic world, Mecca, Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, Istanbul, wherever people gathered to talk, think, and stay awake. These early coffeehouses, known as kahvekhana, were revolutionary. They weren't just places to drink coffee, they were centers of culture. Poets recited verses, scholars debated philosophy, musicians played traditional instruments, and storytellers captivated crowds. In a world before social media or even newspapers, the coffeehouse was the place to get your daily dose of news, gossip, and intellectual exchange. Think about that. In the 15th and 16th centuries, people gathered in candlelit rooms, sipping coffee out of clay cups, discussing everything from religion to politics. These gatherings created a new kind of public space, open to different classes, religions, and professions. In many ways, coffeehouses were the original social networks. But not everyone loved this new trend. As coffee grew in popularity, it also sparked controversy. Religious leaders and rulers were suspicious. They worried that coffeehouses encouraged dangerous ideas, rebellious conversations, and even un-Islamic behavior. In fact, in Mecca, coffee was banned for a time in the 16th century. Coffeehouses were raided, beans were burned in the streets, and drinkers were punished. But coffee had already become too important to suppress. The bans didn't last, and over time, even religious authorities began to accept coffee as a useful and respectable drink. Why? Because it didn't intoxicate like wine, it stimulated the mind, encouraged conversation, and even improved focus during prayer. Coffee had found its place in Islamic culture, and from there, it was only a matter of time before it reached the rest of the world. By the end of the 16th century, coffee had become deeply embedded in the daily life of the Islamic world. It was traded through powerful Ottoman and Arabian ports, carried by merchants, scholars, and pilgrims. Whether in a mosque courtyard, a caravanserai along the Silk Road, or a busy bazaar in Cairo, coffee had become the drink of choice. And so, from the mystics of Yemen to the thinkers of Istanbul, coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was fuel for thought, spirituality, and social connection. After its discovery in Ethiopia, coffee didn't stay hidden in the mountains for long. It made its way across the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, specifically Yemen, where it began to gain popularity in the 15th century. Here, coffee took on a new life, not just as a beverage, but as a part of daily ritual, culture, and even spirituality. In the Sufi monasteries of Yemen, monks used coffee to stay awake during long nights of prayer and meditation. It was considered almost sacred, a helper in connecting the human spirit with the divine. Coffee's stimulating effect was a tool for devotion. But soon, its use spread beyond the religious world. People began drinking coffee in their homes, and then, in public spaces, marking the birth of something revolutionary, the coffeehouse. The first known coffeehouses, known as kahvekhana, opened in cities across the Middle East. From Mecca to Cairo, Baghdad to Istanbul, these cafes weren't just places to drink coffee. They were vibrant hubs of conversation, storytelling, poetry, music, and political debate. Imagine it, men sitting cross-legged on woven rugs, sipping dark, strong coffee from small cups, discussing the events of the day, literature, or philosophy. Coffee became the fuel of thought, of art, and of revolution. But not everyone was a fan. As coffeehouses grew in popularity, some religious leaders began to see them as dangerous. Not because of the drink itself, but because of what happened inside. People debated politics, questioned authority, and criticized leaders. That made the ruling class uncomfortable. In fact, there were several attempts to ban coffee entirely. In Mecca, in the 16th century, religious leaders argued that coffee caused radical thinking and even led to rebellious behavior. But each time it was banned, public outcry forced rulers to reverse the decision. Coffee had become too important, too loved, too rooted in daily life to disappear. Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, coffee became a symbol of sophistication and culture. The Turks elevated coffee preparation into an art form. It was ground finely, brewed slowly, and served elegantly. Turkish coffee became so iconic that it's still a traditional part of Turkish culture today, especially during weddings and formal gatherings. By the early 17th century, coffee had begun its journey toward Europe, and that's where things would truly explode. But before it reached the West, coffee had already transformed the Islamic world. It had become more than just a drink. It was a cultural movement, a catalyst for ideas, and a symbol of unity in the shared experience of sipping something strong, bitter, and strangely comforting. When coffee first arrived in Europe in the early 1600s, it didn't enter quietly. No, it made a grand entrance, full of controversy, curiosity, and cultural drama. The first European ports to welcome coffee were in Venice. Thanks to the city's strong trading ties with the Ottoman Empire, merchants and travelers began bringing back this mysterious black beverage that the Muslims called kahwa. At first, Europeans didn't quite know what to make of it. It was bitter, dark, and unlike anything they were used to. Some even called it the bitter invention of Satan. Yes, you heard that right, Satan. Why? Because coffee was associated with the Islamic world, and to many conservative Europeans, anything Islamic was suspicious. It didn't help that coffee energized the mind and made people alert, something the Catholic Church viewed as potentially dangerous. People began to talk, rumors spread. Was this drink unholy? Could it be corrupting Christian souls? In fact, the controversy grew so much that in 1600, coffee was brought directly before the Pope, Pope Clement VIII, so that he could judge whether it should be banned. But instead of condemning it, something unexpected happened. The Pope took a sip, paused, and smiled. Then he declared, "This devil's drink is so delicious, it would be a sin to let only non-believers enjoy it." And just like that, coffee was baptized, not banned. The Church's blessing opened the gates for coffee to spread across Europe. Soon after, coffeehouses began popping up in Italy, France, England, and beyond. And much like in the Islamic world, these cafes became centers of discussion, creativity, and troublemaking. Let's talk about London in the 1600s. London's first coffeehouse opened in 1652, and it was immediately popular. For the price of just 1 penny, you could buy a cup of coffee and a seat at a table where people from all walks of life gathered. These places were loud, buzzing with energy. Businessmen, poets, philosophers, and even politicians came together to share ideas. And because you only needed a penny to enter, these coffeehouses became known as penny universities. Why? Because you could learn more in an hour of conversation there than in a semester at a traditional university. People talked about everything: politics, religion, trade, literature, science. Newspapers were shared. Public announcements were made. Deals were struck. Revolutions were planned. Ideas were born. But not everyone loved the coffeehouse culture. Some women, for example, were furious that their husbands were spending hours in coffeehouses instead of coming home. In 1674, a group of angry English women published a satirical petition titled "The Women's Petition Against Coffee." In it, they claimed that coffee made men lazy, sterile, and, to put it politely, less romantic at home. One line famously complained that men had disappeared into these coffeehouses and come home with nothing but empty heads and dry hearts. Meanwhile, the governments of Europe were beginning to worry too. In France, King Louis XIV's advisors warned him that coffeehouses might be breeding grounds for political rebellion. In England, King Charles II even tried to shut them down in 1675, fearing that they encouraged dangerous discussions about overthrowing the monarchy. But just like in the Islamic world, the bans didn't last. Public backlash was too strong. People loved their coffee, and their coffeehouses, too much to give them up. Coffee was now unstoppable. It had gone from being a suspicious foreign drink to the very center of European intellectual life. It helped fuel the Age of Enlightenment, a period when science, reason, and philosophy flourished across Europe. In many ways, coffee replaced alcohol as the drink of choice for serious thinkers. It sharpened the mind instead of clouding it. It kept people awake instead of making them sleepy. It made them talk, debate, dream. So by the late 17th century, coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a revolution in a cup. A drink that challenged old traditions, inspired new ideas, and changed the rhythm of daily life across Europe. But this was just the beginning. Coffee's journey from a local Ethiopian legend to a global phenomenon is one of trade, exploration, and cultural transformation. After establishing deep roots in the Arab world, coffee began to spread rapidly beyond the Middle East, reaching every corner of the globe over the course of several centuries. By the 17th century, coffee had entered Europe. At first, it was met with suspicion. Some people even referred to it as the bitter invention of Satan. But as more people tasted it and experienced its stimulating effects, coffeehouses began to flourish across European cities. In England, France, and the Netherlands, these coffeehouses became known as penny universities because for the price of a cup of coffee, one could engage in stimulating conversations, political debates, and intellectual discussions. Venice, due to its extensive trade with the Ottoman Empire, was one of the first European cities to embrace coffee. Soon after, the drink made its way to England, where the first coffeehouse opened in Oxford in 1650. Within a few decades, there were hundreds of coffeehouses across London alone. These places weren't just about caffeine, they were cultural hotspots where business, science, and literature mixed freely. As coffee's popularity grew, colonial powers saw economic opportunity. The Dutch were among the first to cultivate coffee outside of Arabia. They brought coffee plants to Java, in present-day Indonesia, in the late 1600s. Java quickly became a significant supplier of coffee, and to this day, Java remains a nickname for the beverage. Not wanting to fall behind, the French began cultivating coffee in their Caribbean colonies. In 1723, a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clot transported a coffee seedling to Martinique, an island in the Caribbean. Despite storms, pirates, and limited water during the voyage, he managed to protect the plant. That single seedling is believed to have given rise to over 18 million coffee trees on the island within 50 years. The Portuguese followed suit, cultivating coffee in Brazil. This marked a major turning point. Brazil's climate and vast land made it ideal for growing coffee on a massive scale. By the 19th century, Brazil had become the world's largest coffee producer, a title it still holds today. Coffee plantations boomed, especially in regions like São Paulo and Minas Gerais, where millions of people, many of them enslaved at the time, worked to meet the ever-growing demand for the drink. Coffee also reached Africa's eastern coast, including Kenya and Tanzania, brought not as a native plant returning home, but as part of European colonization and plantation development. What's striking is how each region adapted coffee to its own tastes. Italians developed espresso. The French favored café au lait. Scandinavians became some of the biggest coffee consumers per capita. In the United States, coffee became a symbol of productivity, especially during the Industrial Revolution and the rise of office culture. This global spread wasn't just about trade, it was about integration. Coffee was no longer just a drink from Ethiopia or Arabia, it became part of people's identity, rituals, and daily routines around the world. Today, coffee is more than just a drink. It's a global culture, a daily ritual, and even a multi-billion-dollar industry. From trendy cafes in New York and Paris to traditional coffeehouses in Istanbul and Addis Ababa, coffee has become a central part of life for millions of people. In the modern world, coffee is not only about energy, it's about experience. For many, it's the comforting smell in the morning, the warmth of the cup in your hands, and the perfect excuse to take a break, reflect, or meet someone. It's no longer just a way to stay awake. It's a moment to slow down. Today, coffee is produced in over 70 countries around the world, with Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia being the top producers. Each region offers beans with different flavors, aromas, and characteristics. This has given rise to a whole new culture, specialty coffee. Baristas now talk about coffee the way sommeliers talk about wine. They discuss bean origins, roast levels, grind sizes, and brewing methods. Some prefer the richness of a French press, others the precision of an espresso machine, and some enjoy the simplicity of a pour-over. Technology has also changed how we enjoy coffee. With coffee machines at home, delivery apps, and instant coffee innovations, people can now enjoy a cafe-quality cup without ever leaving their house. But at the same time, many still choose to visit coffee shops, not just for the drink, but for the atmosphere. Coffee shops have become modern gathering spaces, where people work, relax, and connect. Social media has played a big role too. From latte art competitions to Instagram-worthy coffee shop interiors, coffee has become part of online identity and lifestyle. A cup of coffee can now represent your taste, your personality, and even your values, such as supporting ethical sourcing and environmentally friendly production. Speaking of ethics, many people today are more conscious of where their coffee comes from. Fair trade and organic certifications are becoming more important. Consumers want to know that the farmers who grew their coffee were treated fairly and that the environment wasn't harmed in the process. Coffee companies are responding to this by becoming more transparent about their sourcing and sustainability efforts. Despite all this growth and popularity, coffee still brings people together in the same way it did centuries ago. Whether it's a business meeting, a date, or just catching up with a friend, coffee often sits at the center of the conversation. It's a symbol of hospitality, connection, and creativity. From the forests of Ethiopia to the cafes of Tokyo, from the Sufi ceremonies of Yemen to the office kitchens of London, coffee's journey has been long and rich. And as technology, culture, and society continue to evolve, coffee evolves with them, remaining a faithful companion to our daily lives. So next time you sip your favorite cup, remember, you're not just drinking a beverage. You're tasting history. You're participating in a centuries-old tradition that continues to shape our modern world.